so quiet. I guess I'll get started. Okay, so yeah, so I apologize for not having the YouTubes up for lecture 3. I was unable to get them up. But for future classes, I should be able to put them up. Yeah. And I will also try to post my slides before the class starts. So I got a couple emails about those two things. So those are the answers. So unfortunately I don't have the lecture 3 videos, and I'll try to put the slides up faster in the future instead of not putting them up until after the class. So okay, so yeah, this is the starter. So I had this up. So everyone can take a look at it. So the question is, it's folded to you in the small blind, and how many big blinds do you have? So this should be people should be getting faster and faster at this, right? How many big blinds do you have? Someone just yell it out. 15, right? So yeah, so you should be very fast at calculating how many big blinds you have, always knowing that number. So you have 15 big blinds from the small blind, and so the question is, do all in or fold? Okay, so we can do some math. Okay, so let's suppose the big blind calls a reasonable range. So let's say the yellow hands are the hands he calls, and I think this is about reasonable. So if you went all in, what hands would the big blind call with? And I claim it'll be something like yellow hands. At least this is so. Do you agree that this is approximately how you would play from the big blind against a small blind with all in? No. So yeah.
No way. It's like, I would call anything with Q2 or Q3 or 4.
Okay. So. Okay. So. All right. Okay. So if this isn't how you play, but if you're okay, put up your hand if you would call fewer hands than the hands I put in yellow, which is fine. Okay. Put up your hands if you would call more hands than the hands I put in yellow. Okay. So we'll do some math, and I think you might be surprised. So let's suppose it's the yellow range, okay? And then I'll change the range after. But let's suppose it's the yellow range. So your equity against this range is, with 10/8 offsuit, is 36%, according to Corkerstone, right? So this is the same thing we've been doing. Hopefully everyone's very comfortable. They know what I mean. They know exactly how to do these calculations. Okay, so also notice that these yellow hands is 25% of hands. So, okay, so this is the most calculation we're ever going to have to do in this class. But, so the big blind is calling 75%, is calling 25% of hands, right? So 75% of the time he folds, and we win 2.5 big blinds, right? We win. So when he folds, we win the one blind from the antes, the one big blind, and the half a small blind that we've already put in the pot, right? So this is the money that we gain that we otherwise would not gain but fold. So that's where this 0.75 times plus 2.5 comes from. Right? And then 25% of the time he calls. Yeah,
but 1/4 of the time you're out of the tournament, 3/4 of the time you're incrementally, you're factoring a little bigger.
Right. Okay. So I'll talk about this after. So let's ignore the tournament factor for now. Let's just try to maximize our expected number of chips. And I will talk about the tournament factor after. So that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I've tried to hide it for now. But let's ignore it for now. So, and just pretend this is dollars, and we're trying to maximize our expected number of dollars. So like that makes sense, right? This makes sense to people, right? This is like the standard the idea of expectation, right? You want to maximize your expectation, because in the long run, what you converge to is your expectation and not anything else, right? So this is the idea of maximizing expectations. So, right? Okay, so 25% of the time he calls, and then we divide this into two cases, right? 36% of the time we win, right? That's what this number is. And then we win 16.5 big blinds, right? We win the 15 he puts in, plus the one already in, plus the half that we were forced to put in. So, and 64% of the time we lose the all-in and lose 14.5. That's what we remain, right? So if you do this calculation, so this calculation makes sense to everyone, right? This is like a standard like expectation calculation, right? This makes sense to everyone? So, okay. So the point is, so you win 2.5, 3/4 of the time. And when you add up this number, the sum is negative 3.34. So 3/4 of the time you win 2.5, and 1/4 of the time you lose 3.34. So this is so this actually equals more than one big blind. So it's positive. So the point is, by going all in instead of folding in this situation, you're making a decision that earns you an entire big blind. That's a lot, right? Like on average, you're earning a big blind. That's a ton. So the chances that you lose out in the tournament is actually 25% times 64%. So it's like 16%. So I mean, that is somewhat risky. It's like 1/6 of the time you're going to be out of the tournament. But on average, 5/6 of the time you're not going to be out of the tournament and you're going to win a bunch of chips. Oh yeah.
Sorry, can you explain the 2.5 again? Why is that 1.5?
Okay, sure. So basically the money that you've already put in the pot, right? You think about that as in the pot. So you don't think about that as your money because you can't get it back by folding, right? So you sort of think about the 400, that half big blind that you put in the pot as, you don't think about that as your money, right? You think about that as already being forced into the pot and you're trying to win this money. So yeah, so the middle is antes, yeah. Okay, yeah, so sometimes in the example hands there are antes and sometimes there aren't. But usually there are antes, especially when the blinds are big, there usually are antes. So the examples I give, I think, are pretty consistent. Like when the big blind is 400 or higher, there will be antes. And when the big blind is 25 or 30 or something, there won't be antes. But yeah, so there are antes. That's important. Yeah, that's a very good point. I should have mentioned that. But I'm always assuming there's antes, basically. I mean, you can see from the picture whether there are antes or not.
So if there are antes, it still makes sense to show.
So
leave that into 1.5.
exactly. So this equation is logarithms. So if there weren't antes, the numbers change. So this plus 2.5 becomes only plus 1.5. And in this case, it would still be positive, right? Because all that matters is the positive number is at least a third of the negative number. But it would be way less profitable if there weren't antes, and you would be a lot less adventurous because the rewards are a lot less. Yeah. Right. So there are antes, and yeah, so that's important. Okay. So the point is, we are maximizing our expected number of chips by going on. Okay. So now let's suppose we have the worst hand possible. So 3-2 offsuit or 5-2 offsuit. It doesn't really matter. All these hands do really poorly. 7-2 offsuit. Let's suppose we had this and we went all in. So we can do the exact same calculation. So the only difference is before with 10-8 offsuit, we said we win 36% of the time. The only number that changes is now we only win 28% of the time. So your expectation when he calls is negative 5.82 instead of negative 3.34. But the point is, this is still positive, even when you have 3-2 offsuit. So if you do this number, it's still positive. So this shove is still a good blind, and it still earns you 0.42 big blinds when you make it. It's not a crazy bad one. We're still earning a positive number of chips and money. Okay, so the point is, while I was doing all this math, I was assuming that the big blind calls 25%, right? So you can imagine if the big blind is calling even less than 25%, like what you guys said, then this becomes even better for you to gamble from the small blind and go all in, right? So the point is, if you're only calling 25% from the big blind in this situation, then the optimal play for the small blind is to go all in with any two cards, and this would be a positive expectation play. So, okay, so let's figure out, okay, this is obviously not good, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense if it's obviously calling too little. it's a good play for the small blind to go all in with 3-2 offsuit. So let's consider adding some hands to our all-in range. So before I didn't highlight queen jack offsuit. So let's suppose I want to highlight queen jack offsuit and add that to our calling range. So, and let's figure out whether it's a good call. So we need to call 14 big blinds to win a total of 31 big blinds, right? So we need 45% equity. So the thing is, if he's shoving 100% of hands, then we'll definitely have this equity and we should be calling. But if he isn't shoving 100% of hands, then we don't actually have this. So if the small blind didn't come to this class and doesn't know that, oh, you can shove 100% of hands, then let's say he only shoves 25% of hands or something like that, then your equity is only 42%, which is actually not enough to call. Okay, so I did a bunch of math, and the conclusion is basically, so right now, from what I see people doing online, the big blind calling strategy that I outlined, I think, is sort of an average of how people are calling, because some people put up their hand and said they'd call more. Some people put up their hand and said that they'd call less. But then, so if this is the average big blind calling strategy, then the optimal strategy for the small blind is to go all in with any two cards. So I would advise, if you're in the small blind, you go all in with any two cards. But the thing is, if people start doing this, then I would advise the big blinds to start calling more, right? Because if the small blind's going to start going on with any two cards, then if you're the big blind, you should be calling a very large percentage of hands. But until the small blind goes on with 25% with all hands, then you can keep your strategy of only calling 25% of hands.
So the question is that if this is actually definitely a positive equation, but
yeah.
If it's a tournament, then your goal is actually to survive.
Right.
So isn't this against your goal of surviving?
Right, okay, yeah, so I'm going to get to that. So someone just asked me that, yeah, I will get to that after this slide, yeah.
I will also answer that. I think that is offset by the fact that the other guy has to survive too, so it is more risky for him to all in, call your all in anyway, so I think that's offset. But if I have to survive, but he has to survive too, so it's really scary for him to call anyway.
But isn't this profitable argument? We have to go
right.
Because we are just against all of them.
Right, so I mean, yeah, so it is kind of offset. So that's true. It is good for you to be a bystander when you watch two other people crash in a big pot. So yes, that's true. That is good for you. So did you have something to do?
Oh, it also depends on what the tax is.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So sorry. Did you have anything to say?
Yeah, I was what about the case where you're stacked that size relative to the big blind and watch it smaller? It's still not so small that it's profitable to just gamble and go all in.
You're asking me in terms of survival.
Yeah, so like if that went back to that previous slide, it one was like 16,000, the other was 14,000.
Yeah.
So what if, okay, so, yeah, what if instead of being like that, one of them had maybe 40% of the chip value?
Oh, okay. I mean,
like 20% or something. So you still have a decent amount, but like, it's the person a lot less to call.
right. So this was the idea of effective stack size, right? So you only care about the minimum of the two stack sizes because that's the maximum number you can gamble. So, okay, so I will talk more about staying in the tournament right after this slide. So, okay. So the idea I sort of wanted to talk something about was the idea of converging at a Nash equilibrium. So the idea is sort of, so right now, let's suppose the big blind starts with the strategy of calling 25%. Then the optimal response for the small blind is to go all in with 100%. But then the big blind would respond by calling a very high percentage, let's say like 70%. And then the small blind would respond by going on with a smaller percentage, right? So it's this idea of two people shifting their strategies to try to beat each other. And eventually, they'll get to a strategy where neither player really wants to change their strategy. So this is sort of the idea. And the point is, what I see right now is this is not what is called a Nash equilibrium, which is the case where neither player wants to change their strategy. Because right now, I would advise the small blind to change the strategy to go all in very frequently. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the idea of staying in the tournament. So every calculation that I've ever done has been about maximizing your expected number of chips, right? So I'm always doing the percentages, and I'm doing these expectation calculations, right? So expectation calculations like this. I'm always doing the percentages and the expectation calculations. And you say staying in the tournament is very relevant. And yes, that is very true. Staying in the tournament is very relevant. But in general, this is still a very good approximation of what you want to be doing. Because the thing is, first place just pays so much more than 20th place or whatever, right? Like if you look at the payouts when you're playing on the tournaments I made, you'll notice that, let's say, so the buy-in is like $1 for everybody, and first place would be like $18, and like 11th place will be like $2 or something, right? This is what the prizes will look like. And if you look at the points, it would be the same thing. First place will only be like 10 points, and 10th place will only be like 1.5 points or something. So it is very important to survive, but in general, to win the tournament, you need to gain chips. You need to, right? To win the tournament, eventually you need to have every chip in the tournament. So you basically want to maximize your number of chips. So, right, because if you just try to survive, eventually you're going to be beaten up by the big blind anyway. Like if you just fold a lot and wait for a good hand, you're going to eventually have so few blinds that the big blind is just going to eat up all your chips, and you're never going to give yourself a chance to win the tournament. So it does seem a bit counterintuitive, but if you believe me that just trying to maximize your number of chips is approximately right, then these calculations make sense. So I'm going to talk about this more in a future class, but the idea is if there's a bunch of people left in the tournament, each of them's percentage of winning, their chances of winning the tournament is approximately proportional to the number of chips. So let's say there's 3 players in the tournament, and I have 50% of the chips. Someone else has 30% of the chips. Then someone else has 20% of the chips. The idea is my chances of winning the tournament is approximately 50%. Your chances of winning the tournament is basically the percentage of chips you have. So that's why it sort of makes sense in terms of maximizing your number of chips when you're trying to win the tournament. And trying to win the tournament is basically, like, it makes sense, right? When you play a tournament, your goal is to get first place. You want to win the tournament. So the people who have concerns about staying in the tournament and not risking all your chips, it is a very legitimate concern. And I'm going to show you something. So it's called ICM. So I'm going to show you something in a future class about cases where maximizing your number of chips does not maximize the money you get paid. But the thing is, in general, maximizing your number of chips is close enough to maximizing the money you get paid that it's just a simplification that's good enough for most purposes. So that's why, for all the analysis I maximize the expected number of chips. Okay, so is everyone happy for now with that explanation? So you're trying to win the tournament, and to win the tournament, you need to have the highest percent of chips of all chips possible. And to do that, you need to maximize your expected number of chips. So that's basically the mentality. So it's definitely not crazy if you know that the big blind is only calling 25% of hands to go all in with 3-2 offsuit in this situation, even if you're risking all your chips, because it's positive expectation. Okay, so everyone's happy that I'm going to go on? Okay, and yeah, I'm going to show an exact example in a future class about staying in the tournament versus trying to maximize your knowledge. Yeah.
This is only if you're going all in, right? So if you had a bigger stack, revert their flyouts, you probably keep going all in, at least
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, so I talked about that last class. Yeah, so the question was, if you had more chips, then you wouldn't raise with 3-2, right? Even if he's only calling 25% of hands. And the idea is basically because of reversing flyouts, because he's in position post-fall, and it's hard to post-fall. All this equity stuff, right? It's assuming you're all in, right? That's the definition of equity. It's assuming both players are all in and see all 5 cards you come and see who has the high percentage chance of winning.
Yeah, we don't raise, you just go all in. Your average stack size is bigger. Your odds can't be worse if you have a bigger stack size than a smaller stack size.
Oh, sorry, he meant if both players have more chips. The problem with that is this equation, if both of you have a ton of chips, let's say both of you have 100 big blinds instead, then this number, the negative 14.5, becomes a lot, right? This becomes, so the thing is when you have more chips, these two numbers are both bigger. The 16.5 and the negative 14.5 are become like plus 100 and negative 100, right? And when that happens, this expression, which is overall negative, will become a lot bigger. So it won't be positive expectation. This is only positive expectation because the number of chips is small. Like if you had 100 big blinds, then this number will be plus 100, and this number will be negative 100. Inside this bracket, you're going to get something like negative 33 instead of negative 3.34. Okay, that makes sense? Okay. Okay, so I think some of you might ask, okay, what if I just raise to 1600 and fold to an all-in? So, okay, so some terminology. So I call this what about raise folding? So some terminology, usually, so I'm going to run through a tournament that I've played before later this class, and I'm going to use some terminology, so I just wanted to get through it, and I think I naturally talk in this terminology sometimes. So the first rebase preflop is called a 3-bet. The next rebase preflop is called a 4-bet. So the raise preflop is basically called a 2-bet. And when I say shoving, I mean going all in. And when I say 3-bet calling, I mean you're 3-betting with the intention of calling if the guy raises again. And when I say 4-betting, I mean you're 4-betting with, as a bluff, with the intention of folding if the guy goes up. So that was just an interlude to go through some terminology. So the thing is, big all-ins are usually good from the small blind. So in general, I said that if you have 15 big blinds, you can technically raise to 2 big blinds and escape to one if someone else goes all in, even if you have a bad hand. But the thing is, I advise against it here because you're out of position the entire hand if he calls and you're forced to play the pot post-flop. So if you were from the button, I think raising to 1600 and folding to an all-in is all right. But when you're from the small blind, it's a lot worse because you're out of position the entire hand if he calls. Okay, so now I'm going to go through an actual tournament that I played. So every single hand I've showed you in this class before has been made up. I engineered the hand, but every hand I show you in this tournament is a real hand. I didn't change it. So I'm going to have lots of theory first, and then examples. It will mostly be pre-flop play instead of post-flop play. I did a lot of post-flop play last class. So the tournament, the blinds go up fairly quickly. So usually you never have that many big blinds. So it's mostly pre-flop play. I'm not going to finish this class. I'm going to finish the tournament next class. So, and I'm going to skip a lot of mathematical calculations now because I'm hoping people will know how to do them. So often I'm just going to say, I think it's possible to go all in with this set of hands without doing the calculation for every single one. So this is a real tournament. The starting number of chips is 2,000. There's approximately like 400 players, I think. And the buy-in is $109 that I played about a month ago. Okay, so remember the 3 factors of pre-flop analysis, right? This is just a review. The 3 factors that you got to keep in mind every hand is my position, which is how many players are behind me, my stack size, which is, or effective stack size of my cards, right? So the idea is you want to know exactly what to do in all possibilities of 1, 2, and 3 of these 3 factors. But obviously there's infinite, or not infinite, but there's an arbitrarily large number of possibilities, and you can't know what to do in all cases. But the idea is you want to extrapolate, right? It's like you're given a number of points, and you want to figure out what the points in between them should be. So that's why I'm going to show you lots of hands so that you remember lots of data points. And if you understand the theory, you're going to know how to extrapolate well. Okay. Yeah.
Can you when going through the hands, just show the basic calculations regarding equity and stack size? Just, here I would consider an equity of 30% for this guy, or something like that. Just for us to get a sense of the equity.
Okay, sure. I don't have it in the slides, but
no, just your intuition as if you were playing without slow.
Okay, sure. Okay, so yeah, so at the beginning I don't show that many hands, and I talk a lot more about theory. So okay, so the first hand is kind of obvious, but so we have the best possible hand pre-flop, right? And the big thing I wanted to talk about with this hand is sizing when you rebase pre-flop. So the bet size, so if I base to any reasonable size, say at least 1,300, then I've put in almost half my stack. So my opponents know I'm never going to fold pre-flop anyway, so I might as well just go all in. And I happen to have aces here, but if I had ace king here, I wouldn't want to just raise to like 1,300 and give them a chance to call with something bad, right? So the point is, if I had anything else, I'm going to just go all in. So if I just raise small to try to get them to call me with pocket aces, then it's a bit obvious that I have pocket aces. So in situations like this, it's basically the escaping rule that I talked about. When you put in such a large percentage of your stack pre-flop, then you can't fold. So it makes sense to just go all in this situation. So if I wanted to raise to a small enough size such that I didn't put in a large percentage of my stack to go all in, then I'd have to raise to something really small, like 950, like the minimum possible size, 950 or something. And I would be giving like 7 to 1 odds, right? So the idea is here, there's no number I can raise to that is big enough, yet small enough such that he's not sure that I'm going to call his all in. So I'm just going to go all in myself. And yeah, so you should do this if you have aces, if you have ace king, you shouldn't just raise small. And I think I see a lot of people rebasing too small. Often you just need to go all in pre-flop. Right, so, okay, now let's talk about what hands I would do this with. So obviously I would go all in with aces. So I would say the hands I would do this with is about pocket eights or better, ace jack suited or better, and ace queen offsuit or better. So I wasn't planning on doing the calculation, but so if you want to do the calculation, the way you do the calculation is you estimate what percentage of hands he's calling with, and then you calculate the equity you have with these hands against the hands he calls with. Basically, that's how you would do it. So, I would deduce that if you run the numbers, that these are the hands that are good enough. So, did you have a question of specific equity of?
Yeah, maybe I guess you know the hands by experience, but if you had to convert this range to equity, how much the equity would be? Because forget stove, but what is your intuition behind that?
Yeah, so the calculation you would do is the same calculation we did in the first couple of slides, which is you got to calculate the percentage chance that they both fold, right? And in that case, you win these chips for free, right? So that was the first, right? That's case one. Case one is they both fold, and you win these chips for free.
I guess my question is, what do you think the range your equity is with two aces there? What do you think?
Oh, okay. So your equity with two aces against hands he calls with is going to be very high. It's going to be like something like around like 80%, I would guess. Like higher than 80%, like higher. So okay, so yeah, we can plug it in. Okay, so I'll show some examples on poker stove. So okay, so if you have so I don't think I ever talked about this. So if you have a bigger pair against someone pre-flop, your equity is around 80%. Okay, so if you can see 8 pocket aces against pocket kings, your equity pre-flop is 80%, 81%. Against queens, it's still 81%. And right against nines, it's a bit worse because nines you get more straights against you, but it's still around 80%. Your equity against ace king offsuit is absurdly high. It's going to be like 90%, 93%. Your equity against ace king suited is going to be 88%. So, okay, so let's go through the hands I said. So these are the hands that you might be up against. So something like ace jack suited still will do fairly well, because if he calls you with pocket tens, you're still around 46%. And if he calls you with pocket queens, then you're around 32%. So a general rule of thumb for pre-flop equity is, so I don't have this on the slide, but the general rule of thumb is if you have 6 cards that you can hit to beat them, then you're usually around 50%. So like ace jack against pocket tens, you can hit an ace or a jack, right? So you have 6 outs basically to hit to beat them. So usually, if you have 6 outs to hit to beat them, you're around 50%. Okay, now if he has pocket queens, then you only have 3 outs to hit to beat them, basically, right? I mean, yeah, you can hit a flush, you can hit a straight, or so I'm ignoring those possibilities. I'm assuming you just hit a pair. I'm just counting pair outs. So if you have only 3 outs, your equity is around 30% usually. So it's 32%, right? It's around 30%. And if you only have 2 outs, so like if you have pocket tens in this case, you only have 2 tens that you can hit to beat, right? If you have only 2 outs, then your equity is usually around 20%. And if you don't have a single out, in the case of ace king against aces, then your equity is really bad. Because in this case, you don't even beat him with any single card, right? You can't, you hit 2 kings to beat him, or hit a straight, or hit a flush. So your equity will be absurdly bad. It'll be like 8%. So those are some good numbers to know. Some other ones, if you have 2 big cards like ace king against 2 small cards like 8-5 off, your equity is usually around 60%. So in this case, it's 65%. But like if you're up against something like 7-6 suited, it'll be around 60%. So those are some of the equities. So it's good to just play around with Poker Stove a lot and basically try to, so it's the same idea of extrapolation. You see a lot of data points, you remember them, and if you know the theory, you can use these data points to extrapolate to figure out approximately what any other data point in the answer will be. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, any more questions? Okay, cool. So yeah, so from my experience, the hands I would go on with in this situation is approximately pocket eights are better, ace jack suited are better, and ace king off suited are better. Yeah.
Is that anywhere in the table, or is that just being in a worse position?
Right, so this is assuming that the cutoff, right, the cutoff raises, and the button 3-bets or re-raises. This is, so remember, the 3 things that are important are position, stack sizes, and cards. So I'm basically telling you which cards I would go along with, given every position and stack size. And yes, the position of my opponents also matters. It's significantly different if the raiser was here and the re-raiser was here. Because if the raiser was here, the hands that he can have is a lot narrower, right? Because when he raises from here, he's going to have something like 30% of hands or something. And if he raises from here, he's only going to have like 7 or 6% of hands, right? So it definitely depends on what position my opponents are, right? That makes sense? Because it depends the percentage of chances that he's going to have aces, right? If he raised from here, then he has a higher percentage of chance of having aces than if he raised from here.
But if you were on the button of the situation, would you still push all in, or would you just call?
Okay, so I talk about that very soon. Okay. Right, so this would in general be my range. Obviously, it depends on how frequently I thought the cutoff was opening, and how frequently I thought the button was re-raising without a good hand. Like, if I know the cutoff of the button are both crazy people who like to raise and re-raise with 7-2 offsuit, then I can see myself doing this with hands as weak as ace-2 suited, jack-10 suited, pocket 2s, like really bad hands, or like significantly worse hands, depending on my opponents. But in general, my range would be what I said above. Okay, so that's the next slide. What about calling So remember one of the biggest arguments in favor of calling instead of re-raising? The answer was you don't give your opponent the opportunity to re-raise again. But in this case, when there's already been a raise and a re-raise, just theoretically, you rarely want to call because this advantage of not giving them the opportunity to raise again is not that high because the cutoff can re-raise again anyway, right? You're only denying one person the opportunity to re-raise. Whereas if it went raise, call, calling has more advantages because you're now denying two people the opportunity to re-raise. So in general, when it's been raised and re-raised, usually you don't want to just call. There are exceptions, but just theoretically the advantages are smaller because you're only denying one person. So in general, when there's been a raise and a re-raise, you usually just want to raise again if you have a good hand or just fold. Whereas if it was raise and a call, calling is sometimes okay because you're denying two people the chances to re-raise again. So if there was a raise and a call, you can often call with a hand like 10-9 suited that isn't that strong pre-flop because there's a good chance you're going to be able to see a flop, right? There's a good chance you're going to see a flop. But in this case, let's say you had 10-9 suited, the chances of seeing a flop are a lot less because if P. Kaiser had a good hand like ace-king, he would just go all in and then he would have to fold. So that's why in general, I don't advise calling in the situation. I mean, yeah, you could call and it would be okay since you have two aces. But in general, you don't want to be calling in the situation because of the fact that you're not going to be able to see a flop after you. So anyways, this was the result of the hand. So this guy folded and this guy called an ace-queen, which I think is fine on his part. I don't think it's too bad. He just got unlucky that I had pocket aces. And I do win the hand that I was supposed to win 93% of the time, as we just calculated. Okay, so the next big hand is a situation where I raise here.
What should the guy with the queen eight should have done in his position before you instead of just calling? I thought calling that hand, right?
Yeah, so yeah, he called. So he called pre-flop, right? So the situation was here, and he folded, and then he called basically.
Okay, so that guy just raised two big blinds, right?
This guy.
I can't see the numbers. The guy who went up with queen ace. What did he do before you went on?
Oh, he rebased. So P. Kaiser, he was the cutoff, raised to 250. The big blind is 100, and P. Kaiser raised to 250, and KIA re-raised to 600.
And you think that was a good play at the moment with the queen ace, or he should have done something different?
I think that's a good play with ace queen. I think ace queen is the weakest hand I do that with. I think with anything weaker than ace queen, I think it would have been putting in too many chips with a bad hand. But I think he could do this with ace queen plus and 9-9 plus.
And it was okay to call then after the all-in that you made?
Yeah, I think so because, like I said, my range is approximately pocket eights plus, ace jack suited plus, ace queen offsuit plus. And if you do the calculation of how he does with ace queen against this range, he's definitely less than 50%, but he's going to be like 40% or something, which is enough given his odds. Yeah. Okay, so the next big hand is I raise with pocket jacks. This guy calls, this guy raises, this guy goes all in. So, anyways, it's not that interesting. So what hands would I call with here? So that's basically the question. So the answer is I would probably call with something like pocket tens are better, ace queen suited are better, and ace king offsuit are better in this situation. So what would I expect my opponents to have? I think Matt in the hat, he only rebased on with 1465. So I think he doesn't necessarily have a great hand because he could look down at pocket twos and say, this guy raised, this guy called, I might go all in and he might go full. So I think he could have anything, he could have a pretty bad hand like pocket twos, he could have something like jack 10 suited, even just because even if he gets one of us to fold, he's still making a pretty good profit, right? Because if one of us folds, even if the other one gets it in with a slightly better hand, he's still going to have good equity because the person who folded put in 240 chips and then gave up the 240 chips, right? Plus the blinds. This guy I would expect to have a significantly better hand because he already saw that this guy was all in. So I think he can have, so he wouldn't have a really weak hand, but I still think he can have something like pocket eights or pocket sevens. So maybe pocket sevens is a bit bad, but pocket eights, ace jack suited is maybe a bit weak as well, but definitely ace queen. So this is why I think my range is something like this. So yeah, all of these are player dependent. If I know my opponent likes gambling, I can call them more. But so the point is sort of, notice in this hand, everyone basically went all in or folded, right? There's not a lot of messy stuff of like raising to 500, like this guy raising to 500, and this guy raising to 1100, or this guy just calling. People usually don't. You're not supposed to, in general, when you don't have that many chips, to just basically play around with your stack, right? You want to preserve every chip. It's basically like in for a penny, in for a pound. When you have a good hand, you just put all your money in. And so I see a lot of people just, calling and then randomly folding when you don't have that many bets. And in general, this is not good. So the idea is that this hand is sort of, you basically want to either like your hand and you put all your chips in, or you don't like your hand and you don't put any chips in. When you don't have that many big blinds, this is basically how you have to play. Like when you have like 200 big blinds, obviously you can put in some chips, and if you don't like the flop, if you don't like what you did, you can fold. But in general, pre-flop, you just want to put in all your chips or fold when you don't have that many chips. So this guy's play, I basically don't think is good. He mowed here 69. He only started with 1250 chips, and he put in a fifth of that, and he ended up folding. So it's basically, when it's pre-flop and all 5 cards are yet to come, anything can happen, right? 5 cards are going to come. Any 2 cards has a decent amount of equity, so which is why you never really want to put in some percent of your chips and then fold. So the result was this. The result was I called when they had ace 10 and ace king, which is very good for me, right? I was against 2 other players, and I only lose if an ace or a king comes, basically. And luckily, it didn't. So I only had to dodge 5 cards, basically. The 2 aces remaining and the 3 kings remaining. And I do. So, okay. So the next hand, let's talk about re-raising pre-flop, but not all. So in this case, so remember, in the aces hand, I said how if you were going to raise, you should just go all in because of the numbers. But this example is where you can re-raise and not go all in because the numbers are good enough, because you have enough chips, basically. So, yeah. This is basically all the big hands I played. When I go further in the tournament, so next class, I'll show I don't want to give away what happened in the tournament, but as I get further and further in the tournament, I'm going to show more and more hands and hands I folded as well. But at the beginning, I'm talking more about each hand and just going to show the big hands, basically. So that's why I always have a good hand. Because I'm only showing the big hands, basically. So anyways, let's compare bet sizing here now. Here, we can make it a reasonable size without making it clear that we're not folding pre-flop, right? So we can successfully do this by making it 1500 or so. So the idea is we don't want to re-raise too small, but at the same time, we don't want to put in such a large percentage of our chips. So we can sort of accomplish this by raising 1500. Right, so there were some rules I gave earlier about, if you're re-raising, make it at least 2.5 times as raise, and but make sure if you're gonna already put in 20% of your chips, then you just go all in instead. Remember these rough rules I gave, right? I gave 2 rough rules. One was, if someone raised and you re-raise, try to raise 2.5 times their raise. The second rule was, if this was gonna cause you to put in 20% of your chips, then just go all in instead, right? These were sort of the 2 rules. So the 2 rules are basically still in play here. But the point is, you can make it 1555, not give away the fact that you're going all in anyway, and still be raising big enough. So that's what we do. And he goes all in. Alright, so I'm going to skip some math, but basically, long story short is, I would expect his range to be something like pocket sevens or better, ace jack or better. When I don't write suited or unsuited, I mean both. So I would expect his range to be sevens, pocket sevens or better, ace jack or better, king queen or better, and the occasional random bluff with like pocket twos or jack 10 suited or something. And against this range that he goes on with, I'm profitable to make this play, I'd say, with about pocket nines plus and ace queen plus. So, anyways, so now the thing is with this hand, if you gave me pocket aces, pocket eights in my shoes, if you gave me pocket eights and you concluded that his range was this, you would probably conclude that I would still have to call this all in. But I said I would only do this play with pocket nines plus and ace queen plus. So the reason is because with pocket eights, I would not be re-raising. I would probably just calling pre-flop. So I'm going to talk more about this now. So in general, when trying to figure out whether you should be calling or raising, this is the comparison, right? So when we had ace king here, we sort of had two options. One was just calling his bet of 625, and one was raising. And in general, these are the advantages of calling versus the advantages of raising. So when you just call, you don't give him the opportunity to re-raise again pre-flop, right? We've been talking about this a lot. You can make good decisions post-flop if you're in position and your cards can play well post-flop. You also don't let him fold hands that you dominate. So like if you have ace king or ace queen and he has ace 10, you have the possibility of the flop coming ace high and winning a lot of money. The advantages of raising is it gives you a chance to win the flop right there and then, right? Even if you have a good hand, you can always get lucky on the flop. Also, you might make him fold some better hands, right? If you were doing this with king jack, you could get him to fold king queen or something. And finally, when you have a really good hand like ace king or pocket aces, it allows you to build a bigger pot, right? It allows him to go all in pre-flop and you can win a huge pot. So in general, these are the calling versus raising comparison. So yeah, so this is the point. So if I had pocket eights and I re-raised, I would have to call his all in. But the thing is, when I barely have enough equity to call his all in after I re-raise, I'm often better off just calling initially instead. So even though in this situation, if I have pocket eights, calling is profitable, it's only because I already raised and put in this 1-5-5-5 chips into the pot. So often, if it's barely profitable to call his all in, I'm better off basically just calling the 625 in the first place instead of raising. So with pocket eights, I wouldn't be doing this play in the first place. So this would never happen. This could never happen if I had pocket eights. Because what I would do is just call this bet at 625 instead of raising and play a pot in position post-flop.
So you said you don't really want to raise unless you
No, so I'm going to get to that very soon. Right. So with really good hands, I'm going to re-raise to try to go all in pre-flop. With the next set of hands, the hands slightly worse than that. Pocket eights, pocket sevens, ace jack suited, king queen suited. I would just call. So he can have lots of hands like ace 10, king jack, 6-6. So I can win a lot of money with king queen against king jack on a king high flop. If I raise with my king queen, he would fold his king jack and I would lose this opportunity. And also, I give him an opportunity to go all in if I raise. If I raise with my pocket sevens, I let him go all in, and I'll probably have to fold. Or like with pocket eights, if I deduce, I barely have to call. I'm not happy about calling. So taking the less risky option of calling and seeing a flop in position is better. So anyways, there's basically two problems with the strategy I outlined. One is, whenever I raise, I have pocket nines or better, and ace queen or better. So my opponent can just fold a lot and get away, right? So that's one problem with the strategy I outlined. Second problem is, when I just call, I never have a good hand, since if I had pocket aces, I would have raised. So when I just call, people behind can re-raise, and I'm almost always going to fold, because I never have a good hand when I just call. So I'm going to take like a 3-minute break, and I want you to think about how I solve these problems and why these are unique problems with my strategy, the strategy that I'm describing.